Okay, let me share it first. Can you see the screen? Is it shared?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so the topics that we covered till now are highlighted in bold. So just to recap those concepts, and I hope that you are using these concepts as and when required while writing the assignments, because you can always bypass these new features, and it is better to use it as and when required. Okay, so we talked about input output using C in C out instead of printf scanf. We talked about manipulators for uh, mm, say proper formatting of the output using both parameterized and non-parameterized manipulators. We talked about new and delete operators instead of using malloc and free. We talked about references, a new type of variables or a new type of feature here in C++. And then we discussed about the return by value, address and reference. Then we talked about how point constants, the const keyword is associated with pointer and reference. Then the concept of structure and class encapsulation, which uses encapsulation, and then we revisited the class, the stack structure or the implementation of the stack. We talked about the this pointer, THIS, and the use of it in implementing cascaded method calls, which uses also the concept of return by reference. We talked about constructors and destructors in general, and then default constructor and overloaded constructors. And then we talked about default copy constructor and then writing our own copy constructor. And then hopefully these two topics has been covered by Deepanita, right? Function overloading and functions with default arguments. So is that part clear till this point? Are these all covered?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay, because now you can see the another list of topics that are yet to be covered, and these are so these are some of these are sometimes trivial. They are not actually uh, say capturing the object orientedness or object oriented exclusive object oriented features, but the rest of the lot mostly it will be trying to implement the object oriented features which is exclusive to C++ or Java or any object oriented language, right? So the actual portion is still left, and we are almost more than halfway past, so I have to take classes to complete the syllabus, otherwise it will be difficult. Okay, so today the basic focus will be to talk about self-referential structures, this one. Okay, or in other words, I would like to I would try to implement the linked list class, mainly focusing on the design of how I design the members and all, and then comes the implementation. So once the design is clear, probably the implementation will be very easy, where we'll be using all these features, as many of them as possible: reference, uh, copy constructor, then overloaded constructor, then return by reference, and all this, and new and delete while allocating space, C in C out. So almost everything will be used. Then function overloading. So it will be a complete example of exercising all these concepts. And then maybe in the next few classes, I'll be focusing on implementing useful data structures that probably requires a linked list kind of implementation, that is hashing or graph data structures, which we've in fact has skipped uh, we have skipped in our previous semester. Okay, and I mean, by this point you will be able to, I guess, write any function, any class, any data structure in a very nice way, organized design, with all the with most of the features which will be functional, right? And after that, this friend function, static members, these are few things which are useful sometimes, but then comes these entirely new concepts and very interesting concepts of templates, inheritance, dynamic binding and all. So let us focus on these particular topics. But before I get into the implementation of linked list, let me quickly browse through the concept of function overloading with say 3-4 slides, and the functions with default arguments. So this is what it means. This is I think one of the simplest topic. In C++, some function, the same function name can be given to several functions. That is we have found, and we have used it also, but they should vary in the number and the type of the arguments. Okay, and the function should not be differentiated only by return type. Although, so in this case, as you can see here, that these two versions of add, they just take the same number of arguments, same type of arguments, and in the same sequence, int float, but they differ in the return type. That is not allowed. So the coexistence is not allowed, coexistence of these two overloading, because of a simple thing, we tend to ignore the return type while calling. Okay, this return type is often ignored. We can just write the function calls like this without considering what it returns and who it returns to. And in such a case, ambiguities will occur. Okay, so if I write here this one, add 2 comma 4.5, so it becomes difficult for the compiler to figure out which of this body you would like to bind that for particular function call, either this one or this one, because the general practice is we often ignore the return types while calling functions. So that's why the overloaded functions cannot be and should not be differentiated only by return type, and they can be differentiated only through the number of types and the sequence of the arguments that you pass as input. Another point that too we have mentioned sometime back, that the compiler during compilation decorates the overloaded function names, right? And this can be one instance of decoration. So this means adding some bit of say information which will be sufficient able to distinguish the three names. So it basically gives new names to those existing ambiguous names. So in this case, maybe if I consider, say, these three are valid, like these are all named as earlier. I mean, when the programmer wrote it, it was named as this: add int, add int float, add float. Okay, so this each of these gets translated to such function names. So the decoration is in terms of this. So the add becomes add underscore int like this. And this is not only done in the function definition, but also in the function call. So the compiler makes this translation or renaming both in the calling as well as in the definition, and that simply resolves the ambiguity. So after the compiler has compiled, as we have found that many things happens during compilation, which the programmer may not be aware of, and that is a kind of abstraction this object-oriented compilers provide you, helping the programmer to get relief from recalling many things, rewriting many things. But this comes at the cost of some overhead during the compilation. So the compilation does some extra work compared to C compiler, and provides you this flexibility, abstraction, or the ease of writing, the ease of much more readable codes and all this. Okay, so but then writing such compilers, those changes may not be very difficult, as you can guess. So renaming it's you can have some convention, and this is one possible implementation. There can be other implementations. It may be int add or whatever. So now comes ambiguities. I think that also you are aware of while it was discussed in your lectures. So can you see this? Hello?
Yes, sir.
So what it says that if I have two functions with the same name coexisting with these arguments, one is float, one is int. What do you think? Will it work?
No, sir.
Then
Yes, sir.
this float and character, and then int and int reference. Okay, so say for example this one. So when I write this 2.5, so we have this definition, and here we call func func 2.5 and func 20. So let us see if I run it, then what happens. If I run the code, then what happens. I think it's here. Yes. So what we are trying to test, int and float. Is it the case? First is int and float.
And sir,
So
the
one is
return
int, one
type
is
is
float. We have
different.
just, yes.
Return type is different, sir.
Return
In
type
the
is
different for the example you have taken from the slides.
here. Yeah,
Yes.
return type really doesn't matter, right? As I mentioned. So what you return, whether they are all the same type returning or they are returning different types, really does not matter, because when you are dealing with function overloading ambiguities or function overloading rules, you are basically focusing on these portions, input arguments. No matter what you return, whether they are same or different, does not really matter. Is that part clear?
Okay, sir.
Because you cannot distinguish. That is the point that I mentioned here. Can you see this?
Yes.
So it's fine, but it may be void or float, it may be both void, does not really matter. That will not impact in terms of the allowance of these two or the coexistence of these two. So this is the case, and I'm calling it fn 5.0 and fn 5. So expecting this 5.0 will be triggering this float version, and this 5 will be triggering this. So let us see that how it works. So it fails, right? And what it says, you read the error message. Error, call of overloaded fn double is ambiguous. So this is getting expecting it to be double, and then it says ambiguous, and it says that there are two candidate function body which it tries to match. So it is confused about matching this call to either this function int and function float. Is that fine? Because why it is happening so? Why it is happening? Why this error message appears? 5.0 is float, we all know, and 5 is just integer, so there is no ambiguity in the literal value that we are specifying, but still there is problem for the compiler. Why it is problem?
Sir, implicitly type conversion is taking place.
Okay, so that is type conversion. So
Yes.
so there is implicit type conversion. This 5, this normal 5 is also getting converted to 5.0. That is called automatic type conversion, right? And sometimes you can force type conversion using typecasting operator. And this conversion, this automatic type conversion and all this has got some serious and major implication while writing codes using inheritance and all. We'll see it later on. Okay, so the typecast operator also can be overloaded, so there are many issues related to that. So that's a completely different story. So let us focus on this part, that it, because of, so the compilers seem says that I am uh, helping you in automatically typecasting this 5 to 5.0, but in this particular case in turn it is creating problems for you, right? Because it is inherently creating ambiguities. But so this is the case because that is how the compiler has been implemented. So and because of this, such two calls, overloaded calls, cannot coexist. So the next one, let us see this one. One is float, one is character. One is float and this is a character. So character, let it be just character 5. Now let's see what happens. What do we expect? Will there be any problem here? Character and
No,
float. Hmm? Will there be any problem?
Yes, sir.
Yes. Anybody says no? Quickly tell me the answer, because you see there are so many topics. Please, do anybody, is there anybody who thinks no? There will be no problem here. There is problem. Why there is problem? Because character is distinctly different from float, right? So character, what is the problem here?
character is converted to ASCII code.
Yes, so character by default it is treated as integers. Like the when you pass character, is basically passing the ASCII code of the character. Basically, so that is actually an integer value. Although we write it character, but characters are interpreted as ASCII, the integer corresponding to that ASCII code, right? And then once it is integer, then again the same problem. The integer gets you know automatically casted to float and all this. So that is probably the reason.
Sir, remove the character call and in place of 5.2 give 5.2, sir.
Which one? This one.
Yes, sir. Comment out the character call, like if in uh, character 5 you have given, comment out that and
Hmm.
give 5.2.
5.2 here.
Yes.
5.0 and 5.2.
You can remove the 5.01. Remove the 5.0.
Okay, you want it to be removed.
Yes, sir. Only this.
Okay. Then also it is ambiguous,
Okay, sir.
because it will not allow this. The thing is, it will not allow these two these of this character and float to coexist simultaneously, because it knows that anyway it is ambiguous. Sometimes you may not, so this 5.2 is fine, but sometimes you may write some character and then that will be automatically typed. So this coexistence is a problem. So compiler knows it is ambiguous.
Sir, what if we explicitly typecast to float, like fn float 5.2?
Then it is explicit, there is no problem.
Okay, sir.
And again, to know the details of something more, you should refer to this link. I have already pasted it in the slides. So there are few instances, and there is a bit more details explanation of the typecasting and all this. Okay, the geeks for geeks. Is it okay? So because it's better I skip this part, you know that there is ambiguity, but which gets converted to what? Because the first confusion that arises, why there should be any problem in having a character with a float? That's a genuine thing. Integer and float, okay, people can understand, but why that should happen, that might be an issue. So there are few things that that particular link has discussed, and I think it's better you read at least once, go through it, right? And int and int ampersand, this indeed will be a problem, because you are, so that we have many times we have tried to state that. Let's try it, and then we are writing here fn a, and fn, writing here 5. So there is obviously a problem, because this a means are you passing the value or the uh, reference of the a, it's not known. So that's why this fna creates a problem. But if I write only this one, fn5, then there is no issue. That's straightforward, right? Got the point?
Yes, sir.
So that say the typecasting, that float, I think the basic understanding lies in that character to float and float to character. So why those issues are occurring, that is a bit confusing by its nature, because the automatic conversion that takes place, you need to know that why it is so. Because int and float, it is somewhat intuitive. Int and int ampersand, that is also intuitive, but in float seems, at least appears to me, that okay, it should work in the first shot. I mean, intuitively it should work, and then why it is not working? Because of those typecasting rules. Okay, so this I would suggest you to read thoroughly, at least for once. And then comes the another very interesting feature of function with default arguments. So if you focus on this, the first code, so these are all done. I think I'm just revising this, because I'll be using it from now on quite uh, frequently. So the thing is, add, there are so focus on this part. So this first one. So this is the body definition, and this is the call. So how many bodies I have written? How many function bodies I am having?
2.
No, how many function bodies I am having? I mean, written by the programmer. I'm talking about only this part.
One.
One only, right? And then just having this, when I'm calling, I'm trying to call both of these two. Add 2 and add 2 comma 5. So having a single body, if I call, if I make these two distinctly separate calls, this is call 1 and call type 2. So will it be allowed?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
So again, see, something strange starts happening. So you wrote one function body. Earlier you said that I can have multiple functions with same names. Now somehow you accepted it. Okay, I have seen it, and I know that some decoration takes place. That's fine. Now you say that I have just a single body, even a single body, but I can have different types of calls supported from that single body. So what you are trying to do, writing something even more impact, not only even more compact. Not only you would like to have more readability, so function overloading, pure function overloading, what it provides you, much more readable codes, right? and you require to recall less number of distinct function names by yourself. Now what it comes, it says that you have to write even less. You have to write lesser number of function bodies, still which can support multiple types of function calls. In this case, two types of calls, one with one integer, one with two integers, both are supported by this. Okay, so what it means, so in this case when it is calling with 2, then this 2 goes to this x, and the second argument y I have written. So that is again something strange, that when you are writing the local arguments, you are initializing it something with 2. So this initialization will only be used or triggered only during the call if you have got one argument. So if you are passing, if you are calling add with 2, the value 2, that means the other argument is missing. So if the other argument is missing, it will consider this 2 provided as a default argument. Okay, but if you have called this add with 2 5, then that means this 2 goes to x and this 5 goes to y. There is no problem. Is that fine? So that means if you have got, because originally the function requires how many arguments? The function requires 2 arguments. There is no doubt about it. Add requires 2 arguments. Now if you have called that add with just one argument, the other argument is missing. So if the other argument is missing, you have also provided a definition of the default value of that argument. So you say that if it is not provided, consider it to be the default value 2 or 0 or whatever. But if you have got explicitly, if the user has specified the 2 argument values, then you just use them, and then the default will not be considered. Is that fine? So in case of stack, say if I say that you create a stack. Now you say that okay, so stack, generally when you create a stack, when you construct a stack, what is the first thing that you require? You basically want to know which value you would like to know, the size of the stack, right? The size of the stack is one of the major argument, right? So if when I construct the stack, if I pass there 5, it will construct a stack of size 5, array 5. If I write here 20, it is 20. But if I don't pass anything, I say that if I don't pass anything, just assume it to be 10. That's all. So when writing the constructor for the stack, I can assume a default value to the size to be 10, right? But if I pass something, it will definitely use that. But if I don't pass anything also, it will be still working. So the point is here, if you do not know this feature of default argument to support these 2 calls, what you would have written? What you would have written here? Without using default arguments, can we implement this? If you do not know
Yes,
default
sir.
argument, can you still do this?
Yes, sir, with function overloading.
So then what would be the body? Add int x, this is 1, and what it returns? You return what?
X plus 2.
X plus 2. That is the case. But so this supports this one, and to support this one, what you do? Add int x, int y, and return x plus y. So the thing is, you know that if you are passing one argument, always it will be adding that x to 2. So if that is the case, if this is the case that you write these 2, so you can go one step uh, further and try to merge this together and have this in this form with a default argument. Okay, so thing is, again, it eases the burden of the programmer to write 2 separate bodies of the function where everything is same, not only the logic, but everything is same, and this default value is always the same. Always it will be just 2 if you just pass one argument. So in that case, I can have a more compact code. And in fact, when you think of implementing the stack class, probably we can end up writing less number of constructors, uh, I mean physically, but that in turn will support. So even writing 3 or 2 constructors, you may have a support of say 5 or 6 ways of calling or creating or constructing stacks, because you have got default arguments. So you can have different combinations. So you actually physically write 2 bodies which actually supports 4 or 5 variety of calls or constructions. Is that part clear?
Yes, sir.
So you try to have a feel that gradually we are trying to ease out the burden or take out the burden of the programmer. So that is the basic sole intention. So the programmer is just, so what the programmer will focus then? The programmer will focus in design mostly, because he or she needs to deal with the real world problems, for identifying objects, their properties, their features, their interfaces and all. So once you have very complicated design, so you just focus on your entire you just put your entire energy in designing and all this understanding, and then coming up with the modeling, the composition, the inheritance and all this. That's fine, but let the compiler take care of uh, the coding has say hassles as much as possible. So you don't have to really recall so many number of function types and all this. So that is the point. So that's why the C++ compiler is getting a bit more heavier in terms of overhead and all this, just to provide the abstraction to the programmer, and which helps him to just concentrate on the design, on the logic and all this. Okay, so that is the purpose. Now the next example, as you can see here, the next example, what we have done. So how many default arguments are there?
2.
2.
So the function has got 2 arguments and both of them are default, right? So both the arguments are having default values. So that means in this case you can call the function even without passing any argument. Still it will work, because both the values, both the variables, local variables, are provided some default values. So even if you provide, even if you call with without passing an argument, it will work. But it will also work if you pass just one argument. But if you pass one argument, then both are default. So which one this 9 should be assigned? Will it be assigned to x or will it be assigned to y? What do you think should be more intuitive, more logical?
2x.
Others, do you all agree with that? Now the thing is, okay, if you don't pass anything, now both will take the default value, that's not a problem. But if you pass just one value, then both are having default values. Now they will start fighting that who should be taking that, right? Because something has been passed now. So what should be the logic? What should be the most intuitive logic? Will you assign 9 to x? Would you expect 9 to be assigned to x or to y? What is more logical?
2x.
Hmm? Why?
2x.
If I like to assign it to y, what sort of problem will occur? 2x we all know, but why it is, where lies the problem if I consider assigning 9 to y, if the compiler designer has thought of like this? Hmm?
Sir, if there are more than 2 arguments, then uh, intuitively what a compiler designer would do, that we would pass arguments starting from the first.
Hmm.
So if I consider passing it to y, that means I am uh, starting from the last. So that is not an intuitive design, I would say.
Hmm. So in other words, Yeah, that is probably the reason. And so you can, so if you think that I would bypass x and I would assign it to y, it will create other kind of problems, and it will be more complicated to think if you have got a mix of, if you have got a mix of default and non-default arguments like the previous one. Is that part clear? So you have got, so you have got in a function, say for example 10 arguments, and out of the 10, 3 are default, and the rest of the 7 are having non-default values. Are you getting my point?
Yes, sir.
So now the thing is, say if there is a function fn, and I've got so many of them. So now you say that okay, I have got two of the default values, two of the non-default values. So y, x, y, and then I would like to place p that is having some default value, then q, then m that is having some default value. Is it possible like this? So what I mean is you have got a mix of default and non-default one. So can they occur in any order in the
No,
body?
sir.
Hmm?
No, sir.
So what should be the choice then? So the thing is, if this sort of say as per your design this occurs, so you should place all the non-default arguments. You should shift first in the beginning. So it should have all the non-default. So in case there is a combination of default and non-default arguments, the non-default arguments must appear before or prior to the default arguments. Is that part clear? Hello. So these are again trivial syntactic issues, but this uh, again you can argue that if you don't do that, there can, it can lead to ambiguity, and it can lead to because after all the compiler need to map each value that you pass to the argument or the local variable that it has uh, provided, right? It is there, so that will lead to several ambiguous issues. So x, y, and q should appear and then followed by all the default ones. So first the non-default arguments and followed by the default arguments. So that should be the rule that should stick to. But within those default or non-default arguments, you can swap it in any order, and accordingly you have to. So when you call it, you have to recall those orders. Is that part clear? So there is another thing. So again coming back to this, when I call the function with two arguments explicitly, 2 and 5, there is no problem because 2 goes to the x and 5 goes to y. So there are two things that we learned. One is if there is a combination of default and non-default arguments, all the non-default arguments should occur in the list, in the argument list first, followed by all the arguments or the variables with default values. That is the strict rule. And when you are calling something, when you are calling a function with some values, so those values will be matched from this end. Okay, from you can say the left end, it will start matching. And it is obvious that you have got say non-default values, so it will assign those values to non-default values, and then if that is exhausted, automatically the default values will take care of the values that is provided. Okay, so another point that we should note here is regarding z. So what is that? So what value we are assigning? Here we assign the value 2, that is a constant or a literal. So here it is a literal. And what is this? What is this z? It's a global variable. So is this allowed? So when you are assigning default values to the variables, to the arguments, we can assign the value of a global variable also. You may not just specify a literal 2.5 or 5 or 10 or whatever. You can even write a variable name, but that should be a global variable. So when you are calling this sub function multiple times, and meanwhile if the global variable value changes, that dynamicity can also be captured here. So this default values does not mean that need to be a very fixed value. It can be a variable also, but that variable need to be global. Is that fine?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
So that is something very important. So it does not mean that you have to just write 2.5, 5 and all this. And functions with default arguments is another way of writing compact polymorphic codes. So the compactness, we have seen that instead of writing these two, we can just end up writing into one. And in the second case, it just helps us in avoiding writing three different copies, one with one integer, one with void, one with int, and one with int. So if you have not known these default arguments, you probably should have to write all the three versions separately, which all got merged into this one. So that's why we call it as it helps us in writing compact polymorphic codes. Polymorphic means, you see, this is polymorphism. With the same name we can call, so it's function overloading, but with more compact function bodies. And that again, as like function overloading, this functions with default arguments might also create ambiguities like this. So if I write, so you see there are two bodies. Now I write two bodies intentionally. So one is one in which it accepts integer, one in which it accepts integer and a character. And in this case, both are having default values. Okay. So now I am calling function 2. What do you think what is going to happen? Function 2. So you say that, okay, I have got a direct match, so it should come here. But is that always true?
No, sir.
No, sir.
Because function 2, you can say that as per my understanding, this 2 should map to this x, and this c will take the default. Hello?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Again, there was some power cut and the router connection went off. Uh, anyway, so we are almost it is 9:50 and I've got a meeting now, so I have to end up the class. So the thing that I just wanted to discuss was, so when you write overloaded function copies, then there is ambiguity. When you write overloaded copies, compact overloaded function bodies with default arguments, that might create again some type of ambiguities, because in this case function 2, if I call it has got a easy and trivial mapping to the first version of this function, right? But at the same time I can also justify that why don't it should be mapped to the second one, because this 2, it will match right from the left, right? And it will match it with x, and then c we don't really bother because c is having a default argument and it should work, and that creates ambiguity. And the compiler straightway says that when you have a call to function 2, there are two candidates, this function fn int and fn int char, with these default arguments, and it fails. So uh, it is probably the most easiest, one of the easiest topics in C++, but the thing is there is always a word of caution that if you don't ensure unambiguous calls, or in the design, when if you so when you are designing the functions or writing the function say arguments, you should make sure that they do not end up with ambiguous calls. So it is your task, so that there lies something that you need to know in details about typecasting, automatic typecasting, the order in which they are called and all this. Otherwise this simple, very simple and useful feature can be a nightmare for you, and you will be able not be able to resolve that what went wrong. Okay, so this is the case, and we can now rewrite that structure or class called stack with these default arguments. So I think I'm having that, so I guess you can all see this, right? Is it visible?
Yes, sir.
So now you see that so there are several constructors. So one is this one. What is this? Line number 21. What type of constructor it is?
Copy constructor.
Copy constructor.
And this is one. What is this? Constructor 0. This is void type. So without passing anything, it can work. So if you just write new stack, it will work. And then you have got an option. If I have just one argument, integer, then it will work. If I have got two, like two arguments, this and this, then also it will work. But maybe I can have a more copy construct with the default arguments. Just let me check. I think I am having the example here. Okay, can you see this? So this is still a constructor. So we have discussed about overloaded functions and functions with default arguments. Now this is an example of a constructor with default arguments, because constructor is also a method, a special kind of method or a function, right? So during the construction also you can have more flexibility. So we can take the advantage of this, and we can write constructors which can support multiple ways of creating or constructing objects, but you just have just one single body. Because in a constructor it is quite logical that if you don't have, say in a linked list, if you don't have some pointer, you assign it to null. So the default values are sometimes quite obvious in case of constructing nodes and all this. So we can try to take the advantage from now on when we write classes or structures, when we write constructors. So we should be writing or assigning default values to the arguments if they are accepting any arguments, so that even if you don't pass anything, if you are passing void arguments, it will work. If you pass explicit values, it will work. So it will be a more flexible construction that is supported by the class definition. And as a user of your class, if I am the user of your class, I can have a variety of ways of calling, constructing objects and all this. So that adds to the flexibility of the code. So this is possible. Okay, so I think I should end it up here. And one of my requests is if I can take a class today from 4 to 5, because I've already missed a class yesterday, and I'm having a meeting now also, and from 12 also I've got a meeting. So is it possible from 4 to
Sir,
5?
actually, section Y has a Viva scheduled. Some people have missed their CA1 actually, so they have Viva scheduled at 4 o'clock.
How many of them have a Viva?
Maybe like 20, 30.
And when, what are the other options in the second half? From 2
Second
to
half, you also
2
have
to
a
3?
lab.
From 2 to 3? From 2 p.m. to 3 p.m.?
Sir, we'll discuss and let you know, sir.
Yes, because see, the point is, I'll often miss classes because in the scheduled classes the meetings are often fixed, and I don't have any control over that. So either I have to leave the course, otherwise you have to read of your own, or you have to take opt for extra classes. So this is a I understand that there may be reservations that why should you take extra classes and all this, but this is a it's a fact which is not, it's beyond my control. Yesterday, yeah, that was my mistake. I have I just completely forgot about. I thought that Deepanita will be taking the class. It's a fault from my side. I should have informed her. But this will happen because once the students are coming, there will often meetings and all. So if you stick to the timeline, then I better, I think somebody else should continue with the course, because ultimately the course will not be completed otherwise. So you decide among yourselves, and because there are recordings are also there, so even if somebody finds it difficult to adjust him or her within that extra slot, if I miss something, so she can still take read the, start, listen to the recordings, and later on ask questions if any. So that way it can work. So maybe the majority of those who are willing, they can attend the class. So that's it from my part, and let me know when I can take the class. But if this goes on like this, it will be difficult, and then there are so many topics left. I don't think it will be possible for me to complete the whole course like this. Anyway, so I would ask the CRs to discuss and let me know about the today, when can I take the class. It can be 2 to 3. I think from 3 you have a class, and so that way it can work. Okay,
Okay, sir, we
I'm
will
leaving.
inform.